the top 50 greatest MMA fighters of all time. The most exclusive list in mixed martial arts. And things have changed. With MMA being such a young sport, things are always changing. All-time greats that graced fans' top 5 for years are being passed up all the time. As their records are broken, fighters move up and down the GOAT list like chutes and ladders. New gen fighters facing better levels of competition. This is not going to be your conventional GOAT list. What is up, guys? My name is Lucas, and I am fortunate to have the task ahead of me of being able to rank the top 50 greatest mixed martial artists in the history of our sport. This is no easy task, and so therefore I'm treating this with the utmost respect. And I've spent the last couple of days really doing research and comparing different fighters' resumes to see who is going to rank higher. Now, I will be honest, it is very difficult to differentiate fighters that are not going to be in like the top 20. And so once we're done with our top 30, I'm going to include about 20 honorable mentions that I believe are good enough to be top 50, but just not good enough to be top 30. And because it would take forever to differentiate between their resumes, because things are very competitive when you get that high in the list, I'm going to do the 31 through 50 in no order. And right before we get into this, let me just break down my criteria. Number 1, the most important thing, quality wins. The strength of resume of the people that you have beaten. That is the best way to determine how good fighters' wins are. And ultimately, I think that the best fighters on the planet have to have beaten the best fighters on the planet, and the only way to determine that is what have those fighters done? What did their opponents accomplish in their career? So that is the most important criteria. Number 2, ratio of wins to losses. You can have some incredible quality wins, but if you've picked up a ton of losses throughout your career and you haven't necessarily established that you were dominant and that while you were in your prime, nobody was able to mess with you, I mean, that's going to hold you back a little bit. So again, if you are one of these fighters that has some decent quality, but while you were in your prime, nobody was beating you, that is going to be really important as well. Number 3, this is going to be a big factor in determining who's higher and who's lower when we get really high up in the top 10, in the top 5. That is, who have you lost to, and are they one of the GOATs as well? Because if we have 2 fighters that have a bunch of quality wins and a good amount of quantity wins, and that's my 4th criteria, by the way, quantity of wins. You have to have a lot of wins in order to be the GOAT. You can't just have like 8 fights in the UFC and that's it, unless every single one of them is against another GOAT. But either way, let's say all things are equal, except for both fighters have 2 losses, but one guy lost to 2 GOATs and the other guy lost to people that weren't that amazing. That's going to be the deciding factor to determine who's better. Now, you may wonder, what about title wins? What about title defenses? I do not believe that title defenses are that important. I ultimately think it comes down to who have you beaten. There are plenty of fighters that have title defenses against people that aren't that amazing, whereas you have number 1 contenders or people that are ranked number 5 that have taken out 3 other ranked fighters that have really awesome resumes that are, better quality wins. And so ultimately, all that matters is what's the resume of the person you beat look like, okay? And it was a lot easier for fighters to defend their title way back in the day because there were less fighters in the UFC. It didn't take so long to get to a belt. Now, modern era fighters have to win like 10, 11 fights to even fight for the belt to begin with. And so by the time they get there, they've already beaten a bunch of ranked fighters. And those ranked fighters are essentially the same kind of guys that champions are beating to defend their title. So title defenses, it doesn't mean that much to me. Even if you move up a weight class and win a second title, there's something very impressive about that, 100%. But it's like, but who did you beat though? But who did you beat? Okay? So either way, without further ado, let's get into this. The 30th best fighter of all time, Justin the Highlight Gaethje at the 30 spot. Give Justin Gaethje a round of applause. He is making the ranked edition of this video. Justin Gaethje In my opinion, he's shocking a lot of people, but this is a perfect example of why I don't believe title wins in and of themselves means everything, right? There are champions. There are fighters that have multiple title defenses under their belt that are not higher on the all-time list than Justin the Highlight Gaethje. We're not even going to call him by his nickname in this video. This is utmost respect. Salute to Justin Gaethje for making the list. Let's talk about Justin Gaethje's resume. And I've compared Justin Gaethje's resume to lots of other solid fighters that haven't won belts. And I think that I'm going to have to come to the conclusion that he may be one of the best to never win a belt. He's at least top 3 fighters to never win a belt. And this is the thing. Justin Gaethje does have a couple of L's. But who has he lost to? He's lost to Khabib Nurmagomedov, one of the greatest fighters, one of the most dominant fighters of all time. He's lost to Charles Oliveira, one of the greatest fighters of all time. And he's also lost to Dustin Poirier, but he's also beat Dustin Poirier, right? He's lost to Max Holloway. That's not the best look. He's lost to Eddie Alvarez, fair enough. But outside of those L's, outside of the Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier, who he has beat as well, let's not forget that. Okay, he has a win over DP. Justin Gaethje has some incredible wins. I think he has some of the most underrated wins ever, because I know there are going to be some people that are scratching their head, and let's just list some of these wins. He was the one to snap Tony Ferguson's 8 or 9 year unbeaten streak when Tony Ferguson was on an 11 or 12 fight win streak. Justin Gaethje, the underdog going into that fight, the guy that took it on short notice, like 3 or 4 weeks notice, where Ferguson had 8 weeks to prepare for that date. It was supposed to be against Khabib. Justin Gaethje was the one to beat Tony. Now, Tony was maybe not at his absolute peak, but if you're the one to end that streak, that is an incredible win. Tony Ferguson's one of the best lightweights ever, and Justin was the one to snap his momentum. Dustin Poirier. Justin Gaethje beat Dustin Poirier, who then went on to beat Benoit Saint-Denis and give Islam Makhachev a tough battle. That just proves Dustin Poirier was not an old man when Justin Gaethje beat him. And we also have 2 Rafael Fiziev wins. Very impressive. Fiziev is a modern era, well-rounded, killer on the feet, extremely technical, and for old wild man Gaethje to beat him a couple of times, that's very impressive as well. You also have wins over Edson Barboza, a 2021 Michael Chandler. I know that we don't look at Michael Chandler as being that great these days, but he's old now. In 2021, that's what, damn near 5 years ago, Michael Chandler was a bad man. And Justin Gaethje sat him down a few times. Don't forget that win over Michael Johnson as well. Cowboy Cerrone and the absolute marauder, James Vick. Now, obviously, the last one is not that great, but I think Justin Gaethje has beaten some really solid fighters. And again, at the time in which he beat some of them, that really does a lot for him. Again, being the one to snap Tony Ferguson's win streak, knocking out Dustin Poirier when Poirier is still, in my opinion, in his prime. Rafael Fiziev a couple of times. Justin Gaethje has a solid case to be at the number 30 spot. But let's get on to Aljamain Sterling, one of the greatest bantamweights to ever do it. He has some really solid wins. A win over Petr Yan in that rematch. Everyone expected him to lose that because he lost the majority of their first fight. And I do kind of count that as a loss because that illegal knee didn't happen until late in the 4th round. And for the majority of the fight, Yan was winning, and it only looked like it was going to get worse for Aljo. But him and Yan are 1-1, and Petr Yan is one of the best fighters ever. He's very underrated. You guys will see. Stay tuned. But Aljamain Sterling has a win over Petr Yan. That's amazing. He also has a win against damn near prime Corey Sandhagen, who he choked out in the first round. He's got wins against Henry Cejudo. And you know what? Henry Cejudo, even against Song Yadong 2 years later, looked pretty decent in that fight. And for Aljo to go into that fight against what a lot of people were saying was a stylistic nightmare in Henry Cejudo, given that Cejudo had a Olympic gold medal in wrestling and that he can't strike with a guy like Cejudo who's super dangerous on the feet. But what does he go out there and do? He actually takes Cejudo down a couple of times. And outstrikes Henry Cejudo. And at the time, people were saying Aljo striking wasn't that good. Aljamain Sterling has a lot of other quantity wins throughout his career. He picked up a lot of decent wins, and I'm going to put him on this list. I think that those wins really carry him. The TJ Dillashaw win, I don't really count that. But, he's got a win over Calvin Kattar, moved up a weight class. I just got Aljo at the number 29 spot. So let's get on to the next one. Davidson Figueiredo. I'm putting Davidson Figueiredo at the number 28 spot. Former flyweight champion with multiple wins in the bantamweight division in his old age. This guy went on a 3-fight win streak in the bantamweight division when people thought that he was done, beating guys like Cody Garbrandt, Rob Font, and Marlon Vera. Now, those aren't wins that got him on the list, but they're just decent quantity wins that help his case. The real reason why Davison gets a look to begin with is because he's taken out Alexandre Pantoja in 2019. Keep in mind, Pantoja is 35 years old. He just won the title, being the second fighter in UFC history to win a title at 35 in the lighter weight classes. It's only been done by Volkanovski and now him. We don't think of him as an older guy, but he is actually kind of old. Figueiredo beat him in 2019. How old was Pantoja? 30? I know he wasn't skill-wise where he is today, but that is a good win. That is a decent version of Alexandre Pantoja. And people forget, man, but Figueiredo has a win over him. He's also got a win, actually 2, against Brandon Moreno. The first fight that they had, a draw. Figueiredo won that shit, all right? I think that the judges got that one wrong. And he also beat Brandon Moreno in the trilogy. They're 2-2 as far as I'm concerned. He's also got wins against fighters like Joseph Benavidez. And people are going to say, well, Benavidez was an old man. He was an old man. Benavidez was like 35 years old when he was getting destroyed by Davison Figueiredo. And I understand that's not peak, that's not total prime, but it's like, it's also not like Tony Ferguson fighting fucking Paddy the Baddy, all right? He's got more quantity as well, beating guys like Alex Perez, Tim Elliott, Jared Brooks. I mean, these are some of the same guys that Demetrius Johnson has on his resume. And, people talk about DJ as being top 10 all time. And you know what? It's important to have a lot of quantity on your resume, but I ultimately think that Pantoja win, that's basically better than anything Justin Gaethje has on his resume. It's better than the Ferguson win. It's better than the Poirier win. That is an incredible win. And again, it was 2019. Maybe not peak Pantoja, but it's like, I'm sorry, but when you're 30 years old, we're kind of counting that as like the peak of your career. I mean, the way that I look at careers is this. You're either old and slightly washed or totally washed. In the beginning of your career, you're a tadpole. If you get in the UFC and you're like Max Holloway when he came into the UFC in his first couple of fights, I consider that like tadpole level. So if they take a loss, you take it with a grain of salt. A couple of years later, you're still in your rookie mode. You know what I mean? But from the ages of like 26 to like 35, all of that shit counts massively. We're going to count that a lot. You're basically in your fucking peak, man. Okay? Like, I'm sorry, dude, but I don't want to argue, all right? We can't just compare. No, but we can only talk about fighters from when they were winning. It's like, okay, but how do we differentiate then? How do we differentiate them? We need to differentiate based on a big part of their career, and a lot of these guys are taking losses during that part of their career. You know what I mean? Prime, in my opinion, the best way to discuss it is athletic prime. That's it, athletic prime. So let's get on to the next one, Frankie Edgar at the number 27 spot. He's got wins over old head legends like Sean Shirk and BJ Penn. BJ Penn is one of the greatest fighters to ever do it, and even he is going to make this list. You'll see where. I mean, Frankie Edgar beat him twice. Prime Cub Swanson wins against the Laguna Beach native Uriah Faber, knocking out Chad Mendes, destroying Yair Rodriguez. He has other wins that people forget about, like Charles Oliveira. Back when Charles had 8 fights under his UFC belt, Charles going into that, he was not a total tadpole. He was a rookie, fair enough, but 8 fights? I mean, you can't say Charles Oliveira was a spring chicken when Frankie Edgar beat him. Yeah, he's lost to Jose Aldo, but Jose Aldo is one of the greats. Same thing with Max Holloway. Frankie lost to Max Holloway when he was like 38. And going into that, he was on a great win streak. But after that, took a couple L's to Sanhagen, got KO'd there and got KO'd by Gutierrez. But that's when he was an old man. and you got to take that with a grain of salt. But Frankie Edgar in his prime had some nasty wins, and that's why he is making this list at the number 27 spot. At the number 26 spot, the assassin baby, Brandon Moreno, Mexico, is making the list. That's right, Brandon Moreno is my 26th best fighter of all time. I think it's time that we put some respect on his name. Now, I don't think this guy would have made the cut in the top 30 if you were to ask me a couple of years ago, even when he was a champ. But again, title defenses, they don't mean a whole lot. And since then, Brandon Moreno has gotten good, solid wins against fighters that are on championship resumes, like Steve Ercik, who Moreno beat better than the actual champ himself. Before that, he set a strike record against Amir Albazi and absolutely schooled him. And that is maybe not the best win, but it's a solid win. He also has 2 wins over Davidson Figueiredo. And although he's lost to Brandon Royval, he also has a win over Brandon Royval. We just talked about Pantoja beating Kai Kara-France and how that's a great win. Well, Brandon Moreno TKO'd Kai Kara-France just a couple of years ago. He's also got a lot of good quantity with wins over Jussier Formiga. But I ultimately think that his wins over Kai Kara-France, Brandon Royval, even though they are 1-1, but wins against guys like Steve Ercik, schooling Amir Albazi, 2 wins over Davison Figueiredo, I think that that means a whole lot. And also, I'm not going to give him that much credit based on losing, but we can't act like he just got smoked by Pantoja. The fight that they had just a couple of years ago, it was actually razor close, and I think that speaks to how good Brandon Moreno is. But now, it's time for us to get to the top 25. Based on resume, this is not based on popularity. We're remembering his name today. It's Belal Muhammad. He is the 25th best fighter, and a lot of people may not like that and whatnot, but listen, this guy has a 15-3 record in the UFC in the modern era, and throughout his prime years, he's only taken a couple of losses, and that's to Jeff Neal in 2019, late 20s, early 30s there, so I'm going to have to count that and take that serious. And then outside of that, he has a loss to Jack Della Maddalena, the current welterweight champ, who's looking like a absolute monster at the moment. That's not that bad. Belal Muhammad is the one that beat Leon Edwards. Listen, you got to put respect on that win. He beat Leon Edwards fair and square, and that's the guy that took out Kamaru Usman twice. Outside of that, he's also got wins over guys like Vicente Luque, Randy Brown, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, an older version of Damian Maia, fair enough, but, that's one of them. And then also, he's got the win over Gilbert Burns, and you could say, well, that was short notice Burns. Well, Belal took that on short notice as well. May not be the best win ever, but he's just got so much quantity. And, of course, he also has the Sean Brady win, which I think really, really carries Belal as well, because Sean Brady, since that, has destroyed Gilbert Burns. He's destroyed Leon Edwards. It's looking like that win is just going to continue to age well, and that does wonders for Belal Muhammad. Again, may not be the best quality wins ever, but this guy also just has a ton of quantity. 15 wins in the UFC, only 3 losses, because he's got that clean ratio. Because he's beaten people like Leon, who just beat Kamaru Usman twice. We can't ignore those 2 wins against Usman. Those are incredible, and Belal beat the guy. But let's get to the number 24 spot, and that starts with Robert the Reaper Whittaker. He's making the top 25. That's right, Robert Whittaker, ahead of Aljamain Sterling, ahead of Justin Gaethje. And here's why. 18-5 in the UFC. And this is the thing, before I get on to the wins that this guy has and just tell you all of the names that Whittaker has under his belt, this guy only has a couple of losses, and he's only lost to the absolute best. I mean, let's think about it for a second. Robert Whittaker has lost to Adesanya once, because I believe that second fight was a robbery. I think he clearly won 3 rounds, but, he lost to Adesanya once, but he's also lost to Khamzat Chimaev and Dricus du Plessis. Outside of that, who else has he really lost to? I mean, he took a loss to Wonderboy and Court McGee when he was a tadpole at 170 pounds. But if we're looking at Robert Whittaker, Athletic prime years, he's only lost to absolute monsters. Again, Adesanya, who he has a win over, in my opinion. I really count that second fight that they had as a win for Whittaker. You may disagree. I think most people agree with me. That second fight, Whittaker should have won. And we do count robberies. Hey, I think you can agree that judges make mistakes. I mean, the easiest way to prove that is just by telling you the judges come up with different scorecards for the same fights all the time. Judges can be wrong. One guy and one guy are not both going to be correct in scoring the round for different fighters, right? So I'm counting robberies, and that's going to be a big part of this video. So that's a win over Adesanya. 2 wins over prime Yoel Romero. Now, you may say that that second fight with Yoel Romero was a draw. You can't say that the first one that Whittaker and Yoel had was a draw. That's a clear win for Robert Whittaker. At worst for Whittaker, it's a win against Yoel and a draw, but I consider the rematch a win for Robert Whittaker. And you're listening to one of the biggest Yoel Romero fans ever. I thought Yoel won that fight when I watched it live. For years, I said it should have been a draw. It's clear to me now that Yoel shouldn't have had a 10-8 in one of those rounds. I'm sorry, the third round, the fifth round, they weren't 10-8 rounds. They just weren't. Yoel had himself a big knockdown moment, and then after that, even in the fifth round, all he did was hold Robert Whittaker up against the fence. I don't consider that just a 10-8. I'm sorry, I just don't. And the third round, Yoel got the knockdown, but guess what? Whittaker was extremely competitive for every other moment in that round. So I think that Whittaker has 2 wins against Yoel. That's 2 wins against prime Yoel. A win against Adesanya. A win against prime Derek Brunson, who was no joke. A win against Jacare Souza, who was no joke back when Whittaker beat him. And remember, after that first loss to Adesanya, what did he do? He got 3 solid wins in a row. Darren Till, who looked really good at the time. That was a solid version of Darren Till. After that, schooled Kelvin Gastelum. And also beat Jared Cannonier. Those are solid wins. And then after the rematch with Adesanya, Whittaker beats Paulo Costa, Whittaker beats Ikram Aleskarov and knocks him out, and that is only going to continue to age well. But he also has that win against Marvin Vettori. And what did he do to Marvin Vettori? He made Marvin Vettori look like Vettori had never trained a day in his life in the second and third round, where we've seen other fighters go to little boring decisions with him. Whittaker absolutely schooled him. And I think that if he beats Reinier de Ridder, it only strengthens his case. And so I got Whittaker at the number 24 spot. At the number 23 spot, I have Adesanya. Now, I did say that these guys are 1-1, but if I'm only going to look at that, if I'm going to look at these guys' career in a vacuum and only assess the times where they fought each other, I'm going to say Adesanya gets the better of it because his win against Robert Whittaker is better than Whittaker's win against Adesanya. Whittaker barely squeaked out a decision, whereas Adesanya knocked Whittaker out badly. So he butchered Whittaker, and I think that that's more impressive. And I also think that Adesanya's win over Alex Pereira really carries him as well. I mean, that's an amazing win. Even though he lost to Pereira, he also beat Alex Pereira. And that's arguably better than anything Robert Whittaker's done. And again, he beat Robert Whittaker. Also, Adesanya has wins over Derek Brunson, who at the time was still very good when Adesanya beat him. And also, he's just got a really decent win over a guy like Jared Cannonier. It may not be the flashiest win. It was kind of boring, but still, that's a decent name to have on your resume. Jared Cannonier, I think that's a respectable win. And of course, he schooled Paulo Costa, did it better than Whittaker, in my opinion. He beat Marvin Vettori. Whittaker beat Marvin Vettori. Now, Whittaker's was better, but still Adesanya beat him. Now, the one thing that I think is worse for Adesanya than Whittaker is the fact that he has more losses during his prime years. I think that if Whittaker beats Reinier de Ridder, I think it's clear that he's ahead of Adesanya, and I think that that's likely to happen. But for now, I'm not going to, fight over these small little differences. But again, he's got a lot more losses. But either way, I still think that these guys are at the 24-23 spot. Let's get on to the 22 spot. The 22nd greatest fighter in mixed martial arts history. That is Dustin the Diamond Poirier. Give it up for Dustin Poirier. He's making the list, and he's high up. He's a top 25 all-time fighter. Dustin, salute to Dustin Poirier. I don't even think it's close. I think that actually it's no debate Dustin Poirier might be the best fighter ever to never win a belt. Okay? There's only one more that I think might make the list. okay? It's going to surprise you guys, okay? So wait a second. Maybe he's not absolutely the best to never win a belt. But listen, what's going to hold Dustin back from getting higher on the list is that he has a bunch of losses. He has 9. Now, some of these were when he was a tadpole, but, you know, you got to count the ones that he has against fighters like Conor McGregor, Cub Swanson, Michael Johnson, Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie. So Dustin does have his fair share of losses, and also there was never a time where Dustin was the absolute best in his division, and there was no doubt. And of course, he has losses to guys like Khabib, Charles Oliveira, and that's kind of why you can say that. And Islam Makhachev, of course, right? But I think that Dustin Poirier is like a perfect example of someone that is heavily carried by quantity plus quality, despite the fact that they have a decent amount of losses. Okay, Dustin Poirier has so many great quality wins, and for that reason, he's top 2 best fighters to never win an undisputed title. Benoit Saint-Denis, Conor McGregor, Dan Hooker, Max Holloway, Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, Anthony Pettis. A solid win. Pettis is a very good win. Jim Miller in Miller's prime, and outside of that, got a bunch of quantity wins as well. Again, Justin Gaethje, that's an amazing win. Wins against prime Max Holloway. That 2021 version of Conor McGregor was extremely solid as well. And while Dustin was at his absolute peak, he only lost to the pound-for-pound best fighters on the planet, basically. But the guy right ahead of him is Charles Oliveira. And the reason why I have Charles Oliveira ahead of Dustin Poirier is because he beat Dustin Poirier when Dustin Poirier was in his prime. Similar to Dustin, Charles has a bunch of losses. I think Charles has like 10 or 11 losses in his UFC career. Okay, a lot of them were from when he was a younger fighter, but still, you got to take that with a grain of salt. But some of them, you know, at the end of the day, they start stacking up and you can't just completely ignore them. But while he's in his peak years, he's only losing to the absolute best of the best, like Arman Tsarukyan, Islam Makhachev, and Ilia Topuria. For that reason, I can't hold it against him that much. Again, a lot of these losses that Charles has are from way back in the day. And even though some of them were when he was a tadpole, some of them you got to kind of count. Like the one that he took to Frankie Edgar and the one that he took to Paul Felder, you got to count that. You got to count that. Those are losses. And, you know, that's not the best look. But then again, Poirier lost to Michael Johnson. So losing to Paul Felder, losing to Michael Johnson, you know, these guys aren't only losing to the best of the best throughout their entire career. So, but there are very similar levels. But now we get on to fighters that have better ratios of wins to losses. Now, there will be a couple of fighters that do have a good amount of losses, but their quality wins are just so good, they're going to keep them high on this list. But you'll see what I mean. This is going to be the thing that really separates Charles and Dustin from guys like Dominic Cruz. That's right, Dominic Cruz is coming in at the 20 spot, former bantamweight GOAT. The reason why I have Dominic Cruz ahead of Dustin and Charles, even though I will say that Charles Oliveira has better wins as far as quality goes, Dominic Cruz beat DJ, okay? He beat Demetrius Johnson, and that was a young version of Demetrius Johnson, but still, that's a very solid win. He has a win over TJ Dillashaw. He has wins over Benavidez. He has wins over the Laguna Beach native. But also, I think that Dominic Cruz kind of established that he was the guy back in the day. I mean, for a while, Dominic Cruz was somebody that just nobody was beaten. And he didn't start his UFC career taking L's here and taking L's there. And when Poirier is in his peak, when Poirier is at his prime, he's still losing every now and then. Charles Oliveira, even when he reached his absolute peak, I mean, yeah, he's only losing to the absolute best in the world. But if you're looking at Oliveira's wins, okay, we're talking Dustin, we're talking Gaethje, we're talking... I mean, it's kind of hard to come up with a whole lot of amazing wins, right? Dariush, those are his top 3. What, we're going to put a lot of stake in the Kevin Lee win? I don't think so, right? So I think that Demetrius Johnson's pretty good. I think that Dominic Cruz's ratio of wins to losses are better. And also, a lot of the losses that Dominic Cruz has are not bad losses at all. For example, like his loss to Henry Cejudo where he got put out. He took that on a week's notice coming off of the couch after taking multiple years off. You know, Dominic Cruz could have never have won that fight. So I don't really look at that as that bad. The loss to Chito Vera, Dominic Cruz is an old head. So I don't think some of those losses are that bad. In his prime, he was really difficult to beat. That Cody Garbrandt loss does look really, really bad. I will say that. But still, Dustin lost to Johnson. Charles Oliveira took a bunch of L's back in the day too. So I got Dominic Cruz there. At the number 19 spot, we got Fedor Emelianenko. Fedor Emelianenko, even though he lost in his prime years, people think, oh, he only lost when he was old. Dude, this guy was taking back-to-back-to-back brutal losses in his early 30s in Strikeforce. But Fedor Emelianenko had a legendary run. From 2002 to 2010, Fedor went 20-0 with wins over future champions like Andrei Arlovsky, Mark Coleman, Antonio Nogueira, Tim Sylvia, and Mirko Krokop. And so, for a while, this guy was on top of the world and absolutely nobody was messing with him. And that's why I have him ahead of Adesanya, Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, and Whitaker. Because even though Adesanya and Whitaker were at the top of their division for a while, in the middleweight division, they never proved that they were clear ahead of the pack and that they had no comp. For a while, Fedor had absolutely no competition. And that's what sets Fedor apart from everyone else on this list. Now, the one thing that's going to hold Fedor from being higher on the list is, again, he did take a bunch of L's in Strikeforce to people like Dan Henderson and Verdum and Rampage Jackson. The number 18 best fighter in MMA history. This is going to be the most controversial one. It's going to piss a lot of people off. But guys, as I said in the beginning of this video, this is not your conventional GOAT list. It is Arman Tsarukyan. Arman Tsarukyan is at the number 18 spot, the best fighter to never win a belt, the most underrated fighter in the UFC right now. That's right. People are going crazy. People are angry. People are throwing things in the street. They're rioting, and it's up to me to defend this. Arman Tsarukyan, guys, only has one loss in his UFC career, and that is to Islam Makhachev. It was when he took a fight on a week's notice, and it happened to be against Islam Makhachev. And guess what? Wait a second. It was also competitive. The only loss that this guy has was a fight that he wasn't supposed to win in the first place, and he still made it fucking competitive, and it's only done nothing but age well. All right? Outside of that, he has no losses. That Gamrot fight, that was a fucking robbery. All right? That's a huge factor. If Gamrot actually beat this guy, I wouldn't even have him in the top 30. He won 4 rounds against Mateusz Gamrot. 4 rounds. That's one of the worst robberies that I've seen in my entire fucking life. It was competitive. You can't say it wasn't. But competitive fights can be robberies. A robbery just means the judges got the fucking rounds wrong. Either way. Mateusz Gamrot. Arman beat him. Joel Alvarez. Everyone goes crazy about Joel Alvarez. Arman Tsarukyan absolutely murked Joel Alvarez, and Joel Alvarez is being talked about like the absolute boogeyman of the division now, right? And that one is going to continue to age really well. Arman handled him. Arman has a clean win over Prime Oliveira. I don't want to hear anybody saying, no, Oliveira's not in his prime. No, Oliveira's not in his prime. Oliveira's had 2 fights since then. 2 fights since then. Oliveira was, 34 years old when he fought Arman Tsarukyan? He was coming off with a Beneil Dariush win. So going into the Arman fight, Oliveira was like 13-1 in his last 14 fights. And you're going to sit there and tell me that that's not prime Oliveira? That's nonsense. I know it was a close fight. I know it was competitive, but he has a clean win against him. So we're talking Joel Alvarez and Mateusz Gamrot, 2 highly respected fighters. We're also talking about Charles Oliveira, and he also knocked out Beneil Dariush badly, and only has 1 loss, which isn't even that bad. And outside of that, he's got like 10 wins in the UFC. This guy's like 10-1. And again, we can just keep going on. He's got a win over Damir Ismagulov. That is a decent win. It's not a great win, but it's a decent win. He was on a 5-fight win streak going into the Arman Tsarukyan fight. These wins are really, really solid. I guarantee you Joel Alvarez is going to win his next few fights, and he's going to put himself in the top 5 of that lightweight division, and that win is only going to continue to age better. Now, how will this look when Arman Tsarukyan gets flatlined by Ilia Topuria? He's going to have to go down on the list. If you take a loss in your prime, you're going down on the list. But again, it's like maybe he bounces back with 3 wins, and it's one of those things where, he only lost to the GOAT of the sport. So we'll see. But I got Arman here. I'm sorry. We can go resume for resume. We can go band for band. Arman Tsarukyan has a superior resume to Charles. Like, you say what you want. Charles beat Dustin and Gaethje, and he beat this guy. Arman beat Charles. Okay? And then we're going to talk about losses. This is the ultimate distinction. You cannot not count losses. I understand that Charles lost a bunch when he was younger and whatnot, but like, as I said, if you don't count that, you punish fighters that haven't lost. Like Arman. He doesn't have losses like that. He just doesn't. He didn't come into the UFC as a young gun taking a bunch of L's. He's too good for that shit, man. I'm sorry. He only lost to Makhachev, and it was on a week's notice. It's like, I'm sorry, but like, who is actually winning short notice fights against people on Makhachev's level? That's just unrealistic. And Makhachev had multiple fights in the UFC up until that point. Just to look at all losses like they're the same thing, I don't think that makes sense. Clearly, it's worse to get 50-45'd and absolutely dominated than it is to lose a razor-close decision. So, I have Arman at the number 18 spot, ahead of Fedor Emelianenko. Some people are really not going to like that, but here's the thing. Listen, let's just talk about it a little bit more. A Charles Oliveira win is worth like 5 of Fedor's. So I hope you guys can understand it. And a Gamrot win is worth like 3 of Fedor's. A Dariush win is worth like 3 of Fedor's. And when you're done tallying up fucking Arman's best wins, he still has like 5 other quantity wins. So, yeah. I mean, listen, guys, as I said, this isn't your grandma's GOAT list. All right, with everyone that's been in the top 10 still in the top fucking 10, and we're only allowed to put new fighters there when they've been retired for 10 years, and we're doing nostalgia bias. No, we're doing analytical bias. All right, so let's get on to the next one. Stipe Miocic.
Old man Stipe. Yeah, old man Stipe. He's an old man boot. He's tough as a root. He'll call your point mute. He's a crafty old boot.
Now listen, Stipe Miocic has a couple of L's. He's got a loss to Junior Dos Santos, but Junior Dos Santos is one of the best heavyweights ever, and Stipe Miocic got that win back, right? He also has a loss to Stefan Struve back in the day, but that was an eye poke, brutal eye poke. I barely even count that. That's like a bullshit loss. Outside of that, Stipe Miocic, the only other losses he has are to absolute legends who he also beat, like Francis Ngannou and Daniel Cormier. Stipe lost to both of those guys, but he also beat both of those guys. He beat Francis Ngannou back in the day. Francis was on a solid win streak, being talked about as a really dangerous guy. I mean, if you're fighting for the title, you can't be considered a fucking tadpole, okay? That was an amazing win. He also has the win against Daniel Cormier, and you may say, well, Daniel was a little old. Daniel Cormier, yes, he was a little old in the trilogy, but in the rematch, in the first fight, you don't get to say Cormier is just an old head, okay? Cormier was good enough to be heavyweight champion. If it wasn't for Stipe Miocic at the time, Cormier would be heavyweight champion for a long time. Even then, even when he was 40, Cormier would have still been fucking people up if it wasn't for Stipe. Again, so Stipe Miocic wins over all-time greats like Verdum. I talked about Verdum a little earlier. Verdum is an incredible win, and he is actually going to make this list as well. He'll be 31 through 50, but either way, that's a really solid win. Junior Dos Santos, a really solid win. And when it comes to that Jon Jones loss, like, I'm just barely even going to count that. As we get on to number 16, that is the undefeated Dricus du Plessis, 1 win away from catapulting himself high up on this list. He's making the cut. Dricus du Plessis is one of the greatest fighters of all time. I know that there's some people, no, Matt Hughes. And they're going to be saying Cejudo. Listen, we're in a new era. Dricus du Plessis is on the verge of being top 15 of all time. I think he's 1 win away from passing Anderson Silva. He's undefeated, at least in the UFC, the big leagues where it actually counts. And he's got wins against Adesanya and Robert Whittaker during their prime years. And we do not just get to say Adesanya was old. Adesanya was like 35 when he fought Dricus du Plessis as a middleweight. You don't get to call that old and washed up. Same thing with Whittaker. He beat Robert Whittaker during Whittaker's prime years when everybody expected Whittaker to absolutely school and style on him. He's beat Sean Strickland, not only once, but twice. And Sean Strickland, coming off of a win against Adesanya. Before that, he was on a long win streak, and Strickland throughout his career has a lot of decent wins. He's got a win over Jack Hermanson. He's got a win over Nasruddin Imavov. that people forget, man. But he took that on short notice against Imavov, and Imavov had been ready for that date for a long time. That win has only aged well. Imavov is a solid win, and Dricus beat the guy who beat him twice. And Strickland was the guy that beat Adesanya right after Adesanya slept Alex Pereira. And then outside of that, he's got quantity as well. He's got the win over Brunson. He's got the win over Darren Till. He's got the win over Tavares. So I think that if Dricus were to beat Khamzat Chimaev, who is looked at as one of the best fighters in UFC history, skill-wise, it's clear that he is going to be the greatest middleweight of all time, and he's going to be catapulted on this list. But the one guy that remains in front of him, in my opinion, at the moment is Anderson Silva. Now, Anderson may not have the same impressive quality names on his resume like Dricus, or even guys like Whitaker and Adesanya, right? The difference is he does have some decent quality, beating guys like Dan Henderson, beating guys like Vitor Belfort, taking out Chael Sonnen. I mean, listen, people make fun of Chael Sonnen, but that's actually an okay win. And also, Silva has wins against guys like Derek Brunson when Derek Brunson was in their prime, and people forget that. But listen, Anderson Silva was also just the best guy in the world, and there was no doubt about it for like a while. For a long time, there was no doubt about it. Dricus, we'll see how his career shapes up, but he could start losing. He could go on a 50-50 streak for the next couple of fights. We don't know. Anderson Silva wasn't going 50-50 when he was in his prime years. He was making people look like fools. He was front kicking people in the face, and they were at least decent. Some of them were absolute cans, and so that's why I don't think Dricus needs like 50 title defenses, and he only needs one more, and that's why I don't have Anderson Silva in my top 10 or very close to my top 10 anymore. But listen, you got to respect it. Silva has those wins over, Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson has a win over Fedor Emelianenko. But either way, I have Anderson Silva at the number 15 spot. At the number 14 spot, we have Jose Aldo. Now, unlike Anderson Silva, there was a moment in Jose Aldo's prime where he was getting beat every now and then. I should say moments. There wasn't just a moment. There were moments where you had 28-year-old Jose Aldo getting flatlined by Conor McGregor, and you had 30-year-old Jose Aldo and 29-year-old Jose Aldo getting beat by Max Holloway, and you had 32-year-old Aldo getting beat by Volkanovski. So, listen, he wasn't proving that he was the absolute best in the world throughout his entire peak years, but either way, the people that he was losing to were better than the people that Silva lost to. You know what I mean? Silva lost to Weidman. Aldo was losing to Volkan Max. It's different, okay? And even though one guy was in their prime and one guy wasn't, it's like, but like 38, it's not like 50 at middleweight, okay? 38 at middleweight is like not the worst thing in the world. It's a little old. It's a little old. Listen, Aldo just has much better quality wins throughout his career, right? You've got Chad Mendes, you've got TKZ, you've got Frankie Edgar multiple times, you've got Cub Swanson, and all of these guys were in their prime when he beat them. You also just have a lot of decent names like Moicano, and you've got guys like Jonathan Martinez. You've got Marlon Moraes, and listen, he lost to Marlon Moraes on paper, but technically that was a win for him. That was a fucking robbery and a half. And I said I'm counting robberies. He beat Marlon Moraes. He beat Pedro Munoz. In a different division, the bantamweight division, Marlon Vera, Pedro Munoz, Rob Font. Now, similar to Anderson Silva, nothing stands out that much. He hasn't beaten that many GOATs, but again, he's got a couple of them. As I said, like Frankie Edgar. He does have that win over Frankie Edgar. And he's taken a couple L's, right? Lost to Piotr Jan, lost to Merab, and fair enough, he was a little old. Not washed up Aldo, but, a little slightly older there. But again, those are some of the all-time greats that we're talking about. Those are some of the best that we're talking about. So I do have Aldo a little higher than Silva, just because I think that Silva had much easier competition, and just because he wasn't losing until he was 38, it's like, yeah, but he was facing a lot easier levels. I mean, I know a lot of people still have Aldo in their top 5. I just think that's absolutely delusional. He just has too many losses. And again, the classic Aldo excuses, nobody wasn't in his prime. It's like, why? Because he lost to better fighters? I'm sorry, but when you're 28 years old, you are in your fucking prime years. You are in your prime years. Aldo didn't look bad when he was 30, 31, 32. He may have stopped kicking as much, but Aldo still looks incredible in his early 30s. Watch his fight with Rob Font and tell me that's not an incredible fighter. Tell me that's a washed-up fighter when Aldo beat Jonathan Martinez. Like, it just isn't a washed-up fighter. I'm sorry, it's not. Even in his last fight that he lost to Zahabi, He didn't look totally washed up. So you don't get to say he was washed in like 2019, 2018, or 2015. You don't. Okay, so let's get on to the next one. Alex Pereira. I got Alex higher than Anderson Silva because he has better quality wins, and I got him higher than Aldo because he doesn't have as many L's. Alex has only lost to 2 fighters in the UFC. That's Magomed Ankalaev, who's got a really decent record, and that's also Adesanya. But he's also beaten Adesanya. He has dropped quite a bit. Alex was actually in my top 10, but because he took the loss to Magomed, a 9-1 record turning into a 9-2 record, the ratio was really what was keeping Alex high up on my list. But either way, a win over Adesanya, a win over Sean Strickland, a win over Yuri Prohaska, Jamal Hill, Jan Blachowicz, all former champions. And this is the thing. You may say, well, Jamal Hill's not the most impressive former champion or whatever. Same thing with Sean Strickland. Okay, but Jan Blachowicz was a solid champion, defended his belt. He has a decent resume and wins over Yuri Prohaska. I think that's going to continue to age well. I think that Yuri is almost really I think he's fucking impossible to beat, man. I think he's impossible to beat. I don't mean to sound like Henry Cejudo, but Yuri Prohaska has a really solid resume. Yuri has only lost to one person in the UFC, and that's Alex Pereira. He's beaten every other person, and he's going to continue to beat every other person unless it's Magomed Ankalaev. But you get my point. Yuri has a good resume. Pereira knocked him out badly twice. But listen, you can't say Alex was washed when he fought Magomed. He still seemed to be at his peak. He was coming off of a couple of the best performances of his entire career. So, yeah, Alex Pereira at the number 13 spot. Not going to be any higher. We'll get on to Daniel Cormier. I have Daniel Cormier at the 12 spot. I got him slightly higher than Alex Pereira. He has wins over Stipe Miocic. Okay, prime Stipe Miocic, who was coming off of that win against Francis Ngannou. He also has wins over Rumble Johnson. He's got 2 of them. And Rumble Johnson, Rumble beat Alexander Gustafsson. Rumble beat Glover Teixeira. And DC's also got wins against Dan Henderson. And don't forget Volkanovski. Right? Well, listen, I know it takes a big jump off after that, but Daniel Cormier, the thing that separates him from Alex Pereira is that he's only lost to Stipe and Jon Jones, whereas Pereira's lost to Adesanya, who's lower than Stipe, and Magomed, who's not even on the list right now. Even higher, I got Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, who also has some sneaky good wins outside of the UFC. Adriano Moraes, those are decent wins, and he's got a couple of them. Now, here's the thing about Adriano Moraes. It's a decent win, but Adriano Moraes recently lost to a fighter that's not that good. I don't even know his name, but you can look at Adriano Moraes' record and see the fighters that he's beating. There's a couple other guys that DJ beat in ONE FC are really not that great. And this is the thing about DJ. He is going to be on this list, and I think what separates him from DC and Alex Pereira is that while DJ was at his peak, while DJ was in his prime, this is why he's higher than all of these other guys, there was really not a lot of competition. Henry Cejudo is like the one guy that you could bring up, but he also destroyed Henry Cejudo in their first fight. And a lot of people thought that that second fight should have gone to DJ. DJ arguably won that. But either way, I think a guy like Pantoja is ahead of him. I think that Pantoja has not made it clear that he is the undisputed flyweight GOAT, but they're basically neck and neck. And if I have to give either one of them the nod, it's Pantoja. Now, yes, Pantoja did lose early on in his career to Figueiredo, and he did lose to Askar Askarov. But Demetrius Johnson took a couple of L's back in the day as well. I think he had a loss to Ian McCall, and he lost to Dominic Cruz. That's not the worst thing in the world, but this is the thing. The quality of Pantoja's wins are just on another level. He beat Brandon Moreno multiple times. He has 3 wins over him. Wins against Kai Kara-France. That's basically better than anything DJ has outside of Benavidez and Cejudo. He's also got a win over Steve Ercik. He's also got a win over Brandon Royval, and he's got multiple wins over Brandon Royval, and we know how good Brandon Royval is. And so ultimately, I think that when it comes to comparing resumes with Pantoja and Demetrius Johnson, after 4 of Demetrius Johnson wins, it's going to fall off of a cliff. You're going to go Cejudo, who he's 1-1 with, basically. You're going to go Benavidez twice, and you're going to go Moraes. Okay, and he beat Moraes twice, I understand. It falls off of a cliff. Whereas with Pantoja, he's also beat guys twice. Moreno twice. Royval twice. Then you got Kai Kara-France. You got Kaya Sakuda. And Kaya Sakuta's not the best win, but it's better than a guy like Ali Bugatinov. Better than John Moraga, all right? And then it's like, okay, after Kaya Sakuda, Alex Perez, Manel Kape, And it just keeps on going. This guy has so many good wins. He's like 14-3 in his UFC career. Yeah, I think it's clear that Pantoja has faced much better levels of competition. Let's get on to the next one. I got Petr Yan at the number 9 spot. That's right, Petr Yan is making the list. I said that Arman Tsarukyan was controversial. Welcome to Controversial City. It's Petr Yan. I have Petr Yan ahead of Pantoja. I have Petr Yan ahead of Demetrius Johnson. I have Petr Yan ahead of Daniel Cormier, Jose Aldo, and Stipe Miocic, Anderson Silva as well, and everyone else on this list. Petr Yan is, in my opinion, the most underrated fighter in UFC history, and it's not even close. It's not even close, okay? You want to talk about these guys barely have any losses? You want to talk about quality? Petr Yan has quantity of quality, and he's got only one real loss. I mean, we're going to talk about this. Let's talk about Petr Yan. Let's just go off on his wins, okay? Because you're going to disagree with that. I think Petr Yan has better wins than Pantoja, and I think he's got better wins than Demetrius Johnson. Petr Yan has a win over Jose Aldo when Jose Aldo was like 33 years old. And Aldo was coming off of a win. And after that, Aldo went on a 3-fight win streak. So we do not get to sit here and say, Aldo was washed, Aldo was washed. I'm sorry, if Aldo was washed when he was fighting Marlon Vera and Rob Font and Pedro Munoz, what does that make the version of Aldo that fought Jonathan Martinez and Batista? Because he looked good in the Martinez and Batista fight. Was he washed? I mean, I guess you could say he's old, and we could take that last loss with a grain of salt. We could take the Batista loss with a grain of salt. 4 years before that, 5 years before Aldo's last fight where he still looked good for many moments. We don't get to say that version of Aldo was washed. Petr Yan beat a 33-year-old version of Jose Aldo who was coming off of a win against Marlon Moraes. It was a robbery. And then after that went on a 3-fight win streak. That is an exceptional win. So that's one. He also has a win over Corey Sandhagen, who time and time again has proven to be a long-time staple in the top 5 in one of the most skilled divisions in the most skilled modern era in MMA history. And he beat Corey Sandhagen in a 5-rounder. Okay? Number 3. He's got a win against Davidson Figueiredo, who was on a 3-fight win streak. That is top 50 all-time fighter Davidson Figueiredo, former champion, lighter man skill. We can keep going. Sean O'Malley, we all know that was a robbery. I know it was a close fight. I know it was a competitive fight. Petr Yan won the second round. He dominated the majority of the second round, and he won the third round. It was very close, but he won the third round, in my opinion. Remember, at the time, everyone was pissed off about the decision. I'm not about to let a couple of measly years passing by fool me into thinking that that shit doesn't matter and that we're not going to count robberies. It's like we're calling it a robbery for a year after. It's 2 years since. It's been 2 years since. So now all of a sudden, we accept the decision. We accept the decision. Nope. That's a robbery. Petr Yan beat Sean O'Malley. Petr Yan also has a win over Aljamain Sterling. You want to talk about the second fight with Aljo that he lost? Okay. He beat Aljo the first time. I know he landed an illegal knee, but you don't get to say that, that fight doesn't count. We've got to write that off like it doesn't even count. Okay, we're not going to give Aljo the credit, but we can't give Yan the credit. Dude, Yan was winning a fucking fist fight. He was winning a fist fight against prepared Aljamain Sterling for the title. He won the first round. He won the third round. He was dominating the fourth. He was winning 3 out of 4 rounds and was on his way to maybe getting a finish and definitely winning the fifth. Aljo was broken. I'm counting that as Yan was the best in the world that night against Aljamain Sterling. That's who he proved it against. That's a win. He beat Jimmy Rivera, who actually has a decent UFC record. And he also has Song Yadong, who just beat Henry Cejudo, who's proven that he's a solid top 10 guy in the bantamweight division. I don't think anyone's going to disagree that Song Yadong is one of the best fighters in the modern era at bantamweight. That is a solid win. So we've got Jose Aldo, who's a top 15 fighter of all time. We've got Aljamain Sterling, top 50 fighter all time. We've got Davidson Figueiredo, top 50 fighter all time. We've got Song Yadong, staple in the top 10 in the bantamweight division. Corey Sandhagen, staple in the top 5 in the modern era in the bantamweight division, about to fight for the title. We've got Sean O'Malley, champion, former champion in the UFC. And of course, as I said, Rivera, there's a bunch of other quantity wins. The only loss this guy has on his record, the only 2 losses, there's 2. One is to Merab Dvalishvili. And this is the thing. Yes, he got 50-45 in that fight, 100%. That may be the most impressive performance in UFC history. And what I'm saying is this. Petr Yan fought the guy who had the most impressive, freakiest, least human, most alien-like performance ever. Merab threw 400 strikes and shot 49 takedowns that night. I'm sorry, but you're not human if you're beating that guy. Okay, Petr Yan's, he's one of the GOATs, but he's only human. Okay? So I'm not really saying, though, that's terrible. He lost to Merab on the best fucking night Merab has ever had in his entire life. 49 attempts of takedowns, 400 attempted strikes. That is one of the most ridiculous things that's ever happened in the octagon. So I don't think that's that bad to lose against. And then the other one was a little split decision against Aldo, where Aldo won by the skin of his teeth. And then, so here's the thing. If you look at Jan's record on paper, you're going to see lost to O'Malley, lost to Aldo. And this is the thing. It's like, there was this narrative that Aldo was the bantamweight GOAT for so long. And it's because people were saying, oh, he's got a bunch of title defenses. They were counting the first win against Jan, the first real win against Jan in the rematch as a title defense, assuming that Aldo wins his title against Jan. It's like, dude, Aldo's first title defense was against TJ Dillashaw, and that barely even counts because TJ had one arm. His first real title defense was against Henry Cejudo. But the point that I'm making is this. If you count robberies, which Jan and O'Malley won was a robbery, it 100% was a robbery, then you count that as a win for Jan. And DJ ain't fucking with Petr Yan's resume. I'm sorry, he's not. And neither is Daniel Cormier, and neither is fucking Alex Pereira. None of these guys are, neither is Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo lost to Jan. And you could say, well, Aldo's got to win over Frankie. Yeah, okay, Jan's got to win over Aldo. Okay? All right, son? We are done with casual explanations for why fighters are GOATs for having freaking title defenses, and that's it. You don't get to say DJ is higher than Jan. I'm sorry you don't. Ian McCall, Ali Bugatinov, John Moraga, and even his wins, Joseph Benavidez, that's not even messing with Jan's top 5 wins. It's controversial, but when I say Jan is the most underrated fighter in UFC history, that's what I mean. I think it's pretty clear. And I mean, again, there's just so many people that are going to disagree with that, and their arguments are going to be terrible. Their arguments are going to be, but winning as a champion is 10 times more impressive because that's when the lights are brightest and it's hard to be the freaking wolf on the top of the hill, man. Like, there's not this thing where only the champions have real pressure on them. Yeah, as if like a number 5 ranked contender who's just dying to get the belt doesn't have pressure on their shoulders to win a contender fight. Get out of here. Arman Tsarukyan and Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira wanted nothing more to get the belt back, and Arman Tsarukyan wanted nothing more than to fight for the belt to begin with. There's a lot of pressure on that matchup. I think there's more pressure on that matchup than even some of these old head fighters fighting for the title, like Anderson Silva fighting for the title way back in the day against some guy that Taylor's Latex or whatever the fuck. Okay? Whatever the hell those guys' names were. If he beats McGee, he's going even higher. So, that's my Petr Yan rant. You better start putting some respect on his name. Yeah! Okay? Let's get on to the number 8 guy. Kamaru Usman is moving up on this list. That's right, Kamaru Usman getting a win over Joaquin Buckley. Usman no longer in his prime years. He's not totally washed, but he's older. And to win against a in their prime Joaquin Buckley, who is super dangerous, extremely dangerous, is very impressive. And even though he has the 2 losses to Leon Edwards, number 1, let's not forget that he beat Leon Edwards back in the day as well, but also outside of the Leon Edwards losses, he doesn't have any other losses. I mean, this is why Kamaru Usman is so high on the list. I do think that Petr Yan has slightly better quality wins than Kamaru Usman, and he has more of them. But Petr Yan, even though he has a couple of losses and Usman only has a couple of losses and whatnot, I honestly rate Usman's draw with Khamzat Chimaev. I actually think that does something good for him. given that he took that fight on short notice. I mean, time and time again, we see fighters take fights on short notice and they lose, and they're always expected to lose. And so you can only give the fighter that wins them that much credit, right? Kamaru Usman took a fight with Khamzat Chimaev on a week's notice and won 2 out of the 3 rounds. And listen, I'm a Khamzat fan. I actually wanted Khamzat to win that fight. And I think Khamzat's one of the best fighters to ever walk the earth. I think he's one of the most skilled fighters to ever walk the earth. But still, he didn't win the fight against Usman. He lost the second round and he lost the third round. He just did. He got outstruck in both of those rounds. And that means he got in the cage and proved that night that he was as good as Khamzat. There's something incredible about that. So I rate that very highly. And he's also got a couple of losses to Leon Edwards. And this is the thing, man. Like, you can say that Leon Edwards is not that great and whatnot, but still, I mean, he's not a terrible fighter. And he was firing on all cylinders when he beat Usman. And you know what? He's only lost to one guy. So outside of that, Usman has beaten every other UFC fighter that he's ever faced. And he was the guy. He was the guy that no one could fuck with for a few years, right? He destroyed Jorge Masvidal, and I know that people don't think of Jorge Masvidal as that great, but this is the thing. He beat Darren Till. Very good win at the time. He kicked Nate Diaz's ass. He should have beat Damian Maia. He should have beat Al Iaquinta. He beat a decent version of Donald Cerrone. Jorge Masvidal is not a win that you can scoff at. I actually think that that's a decent win that Kamaru Usman has. I know he beat him twice. The first time it was on short notice, whatever, but still, Masvidal was very dangerous at the time. Gilbert Burns, very good win against Gilbert Burns. I know that now Gilbert Burns isn't looking so good, but that's because he's old and washed. Kamaru Usman beat Gilbert Burns when Gilbert Burns was at his absolute peak, with the lighter man skill coming up from 155, who was destroying people, who was looking very good, looking unstoppable. Remember, Gilbert Burns was the second guy to beat Woodley after Woodley lost to Usman. I know Woodley took a couple L's way back in the day, but still, the Burns win is great. The Colby wins. I know Colby doesn't have the best resume, but there's no denying that Colby Covington was a great fighter in his prime. I think that he had been a little bit overrated throughout his whole career, but he was still a solid fighter in his prime, and Kamaru Usman beat him twice. So he's got Gilbert Burns, he's got Jorge Masvidal, he's got Colby Covington twice, he's got Buckley. He had a draw with Khamzat. And outside of that, he's got RDA. Then he also has Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland was on a win streak going into the Usman fight. I think he was on like a 4-fight win streak, and Usman dominated him. And that win has only aged better. Sean Strickland went on to become a champion. But yeah, let's get on to the number 7 best fighter in MMA history, and that is Max Holloway. Now, I will say this. If Max loses to Dustin Poirier, I think Jan and Usman go ahead of him. I will say that. I do think that these guys are all razor close. Now, Jan and Usman have less losses than Holloway. But Max Holloway, similar to Usman, if you're looking at his prime years, even though he has a bunch of losses, a bunch of those are to one guy and one guy only. It's like Usman losing twice to Leon, but it's only one guy, right? Either way, he's got a loss to Poirier, he's got a loss to Volk, and outside of that, he's got losses to McGregor and Dennis Bermudez, but that was when he was very young. That was like rookie mode Max. You kind of have to take that with a bit of a grain of salt. The reason why I think Max is slightly higher than Jan and Usman, and again, if he beats Dustin Poirier, I think there's an even stronger case for that, but it's ultimately because he's got, like Jan, so much quality, and he's just got more quantity as well, and that's ultimately why. You know, Max does have some losses, but again, Poirier, Volk, of course, I forgot about the Poirier one. There is that as well, but Max just has so many amazing fighters that he's beat, and this is it. I'm going to list you guys the names that Holloway has on his resume. Cub Swanson, Ricardo Lamas, Anthony Pettis. Right off the bat, those are very good wins. Those are solid wins. Anthony Pettis was no joke. That's a former champion that we're talking about. He then has Jose Aldo twice, and this is the thing. I talked about Jan having a good win over Aldo. Max's are better because when Max beat Jose Aldo was closer to his absolute pinnacle. And another thing that we have to keep in mind is that Aldo was coming off of a win going into those Holloway fights. Even though he got knocked out by McGregor, in between that, he had beaten Frankie Edgar for the title. So Holloway was facing an Aldo that had just got his confidence back a little bit, and he beat him twice in a row. So right off the bat, Aldo twice, Ricardo Lamas, Anthony Pettis, and then he really starts to go on a run. Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar, Calvin Kattar, one of the best performances in UFC history, Yair Rodriguez, very impressive performance for Max as well. Arnold Allen, which is a very solid, respectable win. TKZ, slightly older, fair enough, but it's still a good win. And Justin Gaethje, who was on a win streak. And then outside of that, we're talking 8 other quantity wins. But let's get on to the 6th best fighter in UFC history. That is Khabib Nurmagomedov, guys. He is the 6th best fighter in UFC history. Very easy to explain this. Khabib was undefeated and he was very dominant, okay? And he also has wins over some all-time greats like prime Conor McGregor, prime Dustin Poirier, prime Justin Gaethje coming off of the Tony Ferguson win. And outside of that, like, it does fall off quite a bit, but still RDA, who was a champ, and he has wins over Edson Barboza. And, you know, I mean, listen, you're going to talk about the Michael Johnson win not being good. Well, Michael Johnson slept Dustin Poirier out cold, okay? So listen, I mean, Khabib does have a good resume. Ultimately, it's the 13-0. That ratio, 100% wins for Khabib. He did leave early, and he didn't fight absolute well-rounded killers like Topuria and Oliveira. That's what holds him back, but he was very dominant. He did go out there and absolutely maul prime Dustin Poirier and had absolutely no issue with him. So I do think Khabib has a very good resume, but I have GSP higher than him. I have GSP at the 5th spot. Whoa! GSP at the 5th spot. Here come the riots. Here come the riots. Okay? Here come the riots, man. I know. Everyone wants GSP to be at the 2 spot, the 1 spot, right? No, I'm sorry. I think GSP is at the 5 spot, okay? I think he's slightly higher than Khabib just because he has so much quantity. And also, I think GSP is a very curious case. There's a curious case of GSP, and this is what it is. You're looking at GSP's resume. He has no wins against top 15 all-time fighters, top 20 all-time fighters, but he has a bunch of wins against guys that were no joke. Okay, like Jake Shields. Jake Shields was a fucking monster, dude. Jake Shields beat Dan Henderson. Okay? Jake Shields beat Tyron Woodley. Like, that's one of his wins. He's also got wins over Carlos Condit. Carlos Condit was a badass. Carlos Condit was a bad man. Okay? And he's got wins over Matt Hughes. He's got multiple wins over Matt Hughes. He's got multiple wins over BJ Penn. BJ Penn, top 50. Matt Hughes, top 50. Like, he's got a bunch of amazing wins. He's got Nick Diaz, Sean Shirk, former UFC champion. Of course, he has the Michael Bisping win. And listen, the Michael Bisping win may be the least impressive double champ win in UFC history, which is why I say that, you know, at the end of the day, it ultimately boils down to who you're beating. I mean, just the fact that it's a double champ win doesn't necessarily mean it's the best win ever. But still, Michael Bisping was at least elite. Like, he may have not been the best middleweight in the world, even at the time, even though he had the belt, but he was at least decent, right? But still, that's just one of them. Of course, he has wins. You may say that he lost to Johnny Hendricks, and fair enough. But, you know, at the end of the day, even though he has a couple more losses, and you could also say that Khabib would never lose to Matt Serra. Listen, that's still young GSP, but it's not like tadpole GSP. But listen, that's what holds him back from being number 2, number 3, in my opinion. So yeah, but I do have Merab higher. That's right. At the number 4 spot, the machine, Merab Dvalishvili. That's right. He cracked the top 10. He's moved up since for beating O'Malley in the rematch and absolutely toasting him and dominating him. But the reason why he also moved up is because I'm looking at the GOAT list a lot different these days. That's why I don't have GSP in the top 3 anymore. Listen, there's something to be said about being dominant in the lighter weight classes, okay? And I talked about Petr Yan as being one of the most underrated fighters ever. Merab fucking destroyed Petr Yan. Like, we know how good Yan is. Even when he lost to Aldo, it was razor close. Merab destroyed him. As impressive as Yan is, and even though I think he got robbed against O'Malley and technically beat him, there was no opportunity to rob Merab against O'Malley. Merab clearly beat O'Malley the first time and destroyed him the second time. And then you have wins over former champions Henry Cejudo, who Still, I know it was a little old when he fought Merab, but Cejudo doesn't look terrible. I was actually impressed with Cejudo despite him losing to Song Yadong last time. That's still an okay win. Wasn't peak Cejudo, fair enough, but what about the fight that Merab has against Aldo? Aldo was on a 3-fight win streak. He was like 30, 40 years old. I don't think we can say Aldo was like totally washed, Yeah, Aldo was totally washed, yet he took 2 years off, came back, and destroyed Jonathan Martinez. So even though it wasn't peak Aldo, it was slightly aged Aldo, slightly older Aldo. Merab still beat him. Aldo was being talked about as getting a title shot against Aljo before that. He was in talks to get a title shot. He was right there on the verge of a title. Merab beating him at the time, even though it wasn't the most impressive performance, it was still a solid win. And the Umar win. We're going to have to use the eye test on this because Umar doesn't have the best resume. I understand that, and that's very important. That's like my number one criteria. How good is the resume of the person that you beat? Umar at least has the Sandhagen win, which is good, and he schooled Sandhagen. That's also impressive. It's how he beat Sandhagen, which was very impressive. But like, you just know that that's an amazing win on the eye test. You know how good Umar is. You know how amazing he is. It's like Khamzat doesn't have the best resume, but we know how much a win against a guy like Khamzat means. That is going to continue to age well. If Umar wins his next fight and then goes on to be a champion, that win that Merab has against Umar, when Umar, you don't get to say Umar wasn't in his prime. He just beat Corey Sandhagen. He's like 29 years old. Of course, those are prime years. So he's got Umar, he's got Cejudo, he's got Aldo, he's got Marlon Moraes, and he's got like 7 other quantity wins before all of those. So if that's not enough, here's 7 extras. 7 extra Demetrius Johnson style wins. 7 extra Anderson Silva style wins, like Chris Liebens. Okay, you get my point. I mean, listen, at some point, people are going to have to stop looking at the GOAT list as a competition to see who has the most title wins. Okay? Because at the end of the day, it just comes down to nostalgia bias with that, because you're just going to be looking at older champions, because fighters just don't have an opportunity to get 10 title defenses these days. Anderson Silva fought for the title in his second ever UFC fight. It was a lot easier to get title defenses, and the competition is a lot more stiff. It's a lot harder to even get to the title, let alone stay champ these days. Yeah, man. Merab is higher than Silva. He's higher than Mighty. He's higher than DC. And what's your argument against that? What's your argument against that? Gustafsson. Oh, yeah, Gustafsson. Yeah, Gustafsson lost to Anthony Smith and lost to Verdum when Verdum was old. Lost to Rumble Johnson a couple times. Like, Gustafsson's resume is overrated. What are you going to say about Anderson Silva? He beat Weidman. Yeah? Okay, but what about Petr Yan? And what about Aldo? And what about Cejudo? And what about Umar? And what about O'Malley? What about those guys? What about, he's literally about to beat Sandhagen. You may as well count that already. You know what I mean? Like, what about that? What about that? Yeah, that's what I thought. Prove me wrong. Merab Dvalishvili is my 4th best fighter of all time. Next, we have Ilia Topuria. He is the 3rd best fighter of all time. That's right! Okay, I just realized that we have too many fighters in the top 10. There's still 3 more fighters left. Either way, listen. Okay, so Ilia Topuria, let's just say he is at the 4 spot. Merab's at the 5 spot, GSP 6. Okay, whatever. Listen, the reason why Ilia Topuria is this high, the reason why he's 4 all time in my opinion, is because the wins over Volk, the wins over Max, the win over Charles, there's nothing overrated about those wins. I'm starting to hear some people say, well, Charles was old, Volk was old, Max was old. Max was old? Max is 33 years old. In what world is a 33-year-old old? Oh, he's got miles on him. I don't care, dude. Max Holloway was on a 3-fight win streak. He was coming off of the best performance of his entire career. He had looked the best he has ever looked in his entire career. He had improved from the trilogy with Volk, where Max Holloway, going into the trilogy with Volk, was looking improved. He improved from the trilogy with Volk, going into Topuria fight. He looked good against Topuria. You don't get to say that Holloway was old. That's prime Max Holloway. Peak prime Max Holloway. And Ilia Topuria knocked him the fuck out. That's never happened. Nobody has ever KO'd Max. And you got people saying, Max is chinny now. Yeah, right. If anyone else did it, they wouldn't be saying anything. Charles Oliveira, in a way nobody has ever come close to, which just proves he didn't knock out Max because Max had mileage on him. He put Charles's lights out with one punch. It was a 2-punch combo. The first punch put his lights out. The power that he has is insane. This guy has like Ngannou level of power, pound for pound at lightweight. He's got Aspinall level of power, pound for pound at lightweight, dude. So it's clear him knocking on Max is not a mileage thing. It's this guy is built different type of thing. So he knocks out Max. Best chin in UFC history. The best version of Max Holloway that there's ever been. I'm telling you, Max Holloway had never looked as good. You could say, oh, he looked better against Volk. Yeah, because Volk isn't the level of Topuria. That's why he looked better in the rematch against Volk. You can't look that good against Topuria ever. Okay? He knocked out Charles Oliveira. Charles was coming off of a win. And Charles is not totally old. Like, he's older. He's not at his absolute peak. But the way he beat Charles, the way he beat him, shutting down the grappling, out-grappling him and putting him in crucifix after passing his guard, and then getting up to his feet and stuffing another one of Oliveira's takedowns, and then putting his lights out cold. And then you want to talk about the Volk win. Guess what? It's clear now. Him knocking out Volk had nothing to do with Volk getting KO'd by Makhachev. I think we need to start saying that. Nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing. If he didn't prove that with his power against Oliveira and being able to chin the one guy that was impossible to chin, I don't know what I can say to convince you. That shot is putting Volk out no matter what. And guess what? Volk looked good. Volk looked amazing in that fight. Volk since then has won. Volk since then has proven his chin is actually not horrible. Ilia Topuria chinned a prime version of Volk. I don't care if he's 35, whatever. I'm not going to say that was absolute peak Volk. I think peak Volk was the version of Volk that fought Max Holloway in the trilogy. But this is the thing that people forget about Volk. Volk was always a guy that was a little bit older. Volk was always, people were discussing after the trilogy with Max Holloway where Volk schooled Max. People were saying, dude, this guy's getting better at like 34, and they were shocked. Volk, remember, started MMA late on. He started MMA when he was like 26. So he didn't really reach his prime until like the Ortega-TKZ fight, when he was already in his early 30s. So Volk at 35 in the Topuria fight was really, really good. You don't get to tell me he wasn't. He was actually looking slick. He was looking like he was firing on all cylinders. He made a defensive mistake that Volkanovski makes quite a lot. That's a problem with Volkanovski's game. 3 best back-to-back-to-back wins in UFC history. That has to count for something. I'm not going to hear anything about Max Holloway being old. No, he's not old. Max Holloway was at his absolute peak. And also has other good quantity wins, like the Yusuf Zalal win, which has only aged well. The Josh Emmett win. The Bryce Mitchell win. These are solid wins. And he's undefeated, has never lost, has never looked like he was going to lose. So Ilia Topuria is a necessary top 5. I have Topuria at the number 4 spot. Number 3 spot, I got Jon Jones. That's right. Falling from the number 1 spot, not just because he ducked Tom Aspinall and we're all upset about that, but I've actually done a little bit more looking at his resume. Jon Jones, outside of his win over Daniel Cormier, and he's only got one that we can count because the second one he popped for steroids, and that was basically cast off of his record because he cheated. But outside of the Daniel Cormier win, I just don't think he can compete with the guys above him. And that's right, we're going to get to number 2, Alexander the Great, Volkanovski. Alexander Volkanovski continues to move up on the GOAT list. I think all of my GOAT videos, he has just been climbing that ladder to the top, to the tippity top. And guys, I just told you that Jon Jones just cannot compete with the guys above him because he only has one all-time great win over a guy in DC. And I think a lot of his wins are kind of overrated, to be honest. But when we look at Alexander Volkanovski, we have 4 all-time great wins. We can talk about the Jose Aldo win. Volk beat him when he was 32. He was coming off of a win streak. He beat Max Holloway not once, not twice, 3 times. You see, we give Ilia Topuria credit for beating Max. One of the reasons why Dustin Poirier is on this list to begin with is because he beat Max Holloway in 2019 in their rematch, right? And he, of course, beat Max Holloway way back in the day, but like Volk beat Max 3 times. 3 times. And he 50-45'd him. And dominance is very important on the GOAT list as well. He not only beat Max, he took 12 out of 15 rounds off of him, right? That's one of the best volume strikers in UFC history. And Volk doesn't have the pop that Topuria has, right? Volk schooled him. That is a little bit more impressive than beating DC, in my opinion. Again, DC's phenomenal, but Jones had all the physical attribute advantages. Volkanovski was shorter than Max. He was a shorter man. And he had to go in there and do the Diddy boxing. But guys, listen, ultimately, I just don't think you can be the GOAT over a guy that has that many all-time great wins. I just don't think you can. Holloway 3 times, Jose Aldo. I mean, even if you disagree with some of these placements, most people agree that Jose Aldo is a top 15 fighter of all time. Most people agree that Holloway is too, right? And I think DC is, but again, 4 versus 1. And then you're going to bring up quantity. Volk's got quantity too. You want to bring up the fact that Jones beat Glover Teixeira and Jones beat Alexander Gustafsson. By the way, just look at Gustafsson's record. It's actually kind of overrated. This guy lost to Verdum when Verdum was old. He moved up a weight class. He had the lighter man skill and he still lost. This dude lost to Anthony Smith. Gustafsson has like a TKZ record, which is like a 7-6 type of record in the UFC. He was a good fighter, but like, you know, we don't get to compare Gustafsson to Max and Gustafsson to Aldo. And this is the thing. You want to talk about Jones's quantity? That's really what held him high for so long, in my opinion. But if you're looking at Volk, he continues to add on to it. Not only does he have wins over Yair Rodriguez, Brian Ortega, TKZ, Chad Mendez, Darren Elkins, when Darren Elkins was on a mean streak. Darren Elkins was on a 6-fight win streak. People forget, man. But he's also got a win over Diego Lopez. And that win was not just to win. Volkanovski became the only fighter in UFC history to win a title fight at the age of 35 and older. He was 36. There's now only 2 fighters to ever do that. The other one is Alexandre Pantoja, who's in the top 5 pound for pound right now, who everyone's ranting and raving about. Volkanovski's still here. He came off of 2 back-to-back brutal KO losses, took a year off, got a year older, came back and won against the killer in Diego Lopez. Diego Lopez was on an absolute mean streak. He hits like a truck. Okay, Volk has quantity, not as much quantity as Jones. Not as much quantity. Jones has more quantity, has so many wins. Shogun, Rampage Jackson, Bader, Teixeira, Lyoto Machida, Thiago Santos. There's just so many guys that he's beat, but ultimately he has a loss. And that's to Dominic Reyes. Who had Volk lost to? Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria. 2 top 5 fighters all time. And I'm not just saying that because it makes Volk's resume look good. And Volk can only lose to fighters that are top 5, so I'm putting Islam top 5. Islam has his own resume. It just so happens that like that's a guy that beat Volk. And he happens to be the fucking GOAT of the sport. That's right. Islam Makhachev is the GOAT of the sport. I think it's time Jon Jones lost to Dominic Reyes. That's worse than losing to Islam Makhachev in a close battle. The second fight with Makhachev, I'm sorry, I'm just hardly going to count that. Like, you just can't tell me that anyone in their right mind expected Volk to win that fight. And he shouldn't win that fight. He should never win that fight. Makhachev should beat Volkanovski in those conditions with Volk coming off of the couch, coming off of a surgery. He should beat him 100 times. 100 out of 100 times. Yes, knocking him out is nice, but like Volk cannot win that fight ever. No one in a pound for pound number 1 type of matchup is winning if they're coming off of the couch after not training for 2 months, coming off of an arm surgery. We're not really going to look too much into that. But at the end of the day, Volk's real losses to Topuria, who we see how good he is, and Islam Makhachev. And at the end of the day, listen, Volk actually took the challenge of moving up to fight a monster. Jones didn't fight Ngannou. Jones didn't fight Jan Blachowicz. Jones didn't give Dominic Reyes, who clearly beat him 3 rounds to 2 the rematch. Jones didn't give Tom Aspinall a chance. Jones's win over Stipe Miocic means nothing, in my opinion. It just doesn't. It's an exhibition match as far as I'm concerned. The Gane win is decent. It absolutely is. I'm just saying it should have been Ngannou. Okay, but either way, I still think Gane beat Ngannou, so that's why I'm saying it's a decent win, and that's why I still think Jones, you can't just say, oh, his resume sucks. Jones's resume does objectively not suck. Gane was a decent win. I still think Gane beat Ngannou. He won 3 rounds to 2. Like Volk losing to 2 top 5 all-time fighters, whereas Jones is losing to a guy that's not even making the list. Volk is beating Holloway 3 times and Jose Aldo 2 top 15 guys. Jones has 1 top 15 win, and that's it. And yeah, Jones has a lot of quality, but at the end of the day, Shogun, Machida, like these guys were basically middleweights fighting him. They were fat middleweights. okay? And the skill level, I understand we're going to be fair to Jones because he was fighting back in the day and he was fighting who they could put in front of him, but it's a lot tougher to beat Diego Lopez than it was for Jon Jones to go out there and beat a guy like Anthony Smith or even Thiago Santos, okay? Jones in his early 30s, having a razor-close decision with Thiago Santos. Volkanovski, up until the Makhachev fight, had only lost 4 rounds in his entire career. I just think that Volk has been a little bit more dominant. Why do I have Makhachev ahead? Makhachev beat Volk when Volk was pound for pound number 1. There's something to be said about being the first guy to beat Volk when Volk had a full training camp, fully prepared. Training with Craig Jones, extra masks on him. He was ready to go. He was an absolute monster that night. Makhachev beat him fair and square, 4 rounds to 1. 4 rounds to 1. I know it was close. I know it was competitive. But this was Volk coming off of the best win of his entire career against Max Holloway. And Islam Makhachev went out there and outstruck him. Very impressive. It was competitive, don't get me wrong, but Makhachev won that shit. I think that he beat Charles Oliveira at a better time than Topuria. Yes, Topuria did it in more impressive fashion, but Islam Makhachev still did it in impressive fashion. Clubbed him, subbed him. In 2 rounds. Schooled Charles on the feet, really. He was the guy to beat Charles and to end the Oliveira era, to end Oliveira's 11-fight win streak. I think that's a little bit of a better time to beat him than Ilia Topuria in 2025, 3 years later, when Charles is slightly declined. I'm not saying Charles is old and washed. I'm just saying he's not at his pinnacle. Makhachev beat Volk, and he beat Charles at their absolute pinnacle. Now, I do think Topuria beat a guy in Volkanovski when Volkanovski was really good. I think that the whole short notice thing, Volk actually looked good in that fight. He looked fast. He looked to be in great shape. And he actually won round 1. Eventually, he was going to get caught. And at this point, it's clear that given what we know about Topuria's power, that power is knocking out Volkanovski if Volkanovski had never been KO'd before. Okay? And not only does he have that, he has the Dustin Poirier win. And I know Dustin's talking about retirement. And therefore, people say, oh, Dustin's kind of old. But Dustin's like the youngest guy to ever be talking about retirement. Let's be honest. He's like 35. And Islam Makhachev beat him. A good version of Dustin coming off of a win. Makhachev also has a lot of quantity. Arman Tsarukyan. That win has aged really well. Dan Hooker. He ran through Dan Hooker. Totally ran through him. Hamzat Chimaev style. He's got wins over Renato Moicano, Bobby Green, Thiago Moises, Davey Ramos, Nick Lentz, Gleison Tebow, Drew Dober. We're talking about a guy who has a record of 16-1. This guy is 1 win shy of tying Anderson Silva's legendary record win streak, but he's doing it in the modern era in the lightweight division. One of the toughest, most stacked divisions in UFC history, against pound-for-pound fighters. Like Khabib beat Conor, Gaethje, and Poirier. Okay, he beat Poirier too, but he beat Volk. He beat Charles Oliveira. He has that win over Arman Tsarukyan. That's better than RDA. Okay, people talk about RDA. Dude, Arman Tsarukyan's a much better win. And ultimately, the reason why I think Makhachev, at this point, you can make an argument that he's the GOAT, is he has the perfect combination of ratio of wins to losses. 16-1 record in the UFC. Only lost once when he was a tadpole. I'll take that with a grain of salt. I know Ilia Topuria, Khabib are undefeated, but they don't have the quantity that Makhachev has. They just can't be next to him. When Islam Makhachev beat Volk, Volk was already a top 10 all-time fighter. When he beat Dustin Poirier is top 25. When he beat Charles Oliveira was on a crazy streak. And that win aged even better when Charles beat Dariush. And when Charles beat Michael Chandler, even though Chandler was old, like, he still got the win. Dariush win. He's the one that broke Dariush's streak. Dariush is a solid win. That's an elite guy in the lightweight division. So that win has aged well. If Makhachev beats Jack Della Maddalena, there's no doubt, there's no debate, he's the GOAT. We're going to get to 31 through 50. We may as well do that now. Glover, Matt Hughes. I'm going to say Shogun. I'm going to say Yoel Romero. I'm going to say Verdum. I'm going to say Ngannou. McGregor, Corey Sandhagen, Henderson, T. Ferg, Tony, Vitor Belfort, JDS. I'm putting JDS in the mix as well, guys. I'll even say Leon Edwards, okay? He beat Usman twice. That's got to at least put you near the 50 spot, right? Woodley, I got Woodley there. Woodley has a couple of decent wins. BJ Penn, I'm putting BJ there. I'm putting Chris Weidman there. I am also going to put Mousasi in the mix as well. I think Gegard Mousasi has a pretty good resume. Strickland. Strickland beat Adesanya. I honestly think Strickland is a better resume than TJ Dillashaw, guys. Like, hear me out, okay? TJ Dillashaw has wins over Barao, and people freak out. Like, Barao's resume is not that good. If you look at Barao's resume, who was Barao beat? Like, people are going to say, Barao! Can you name me 3 good Barao wins? You can't. You literally can't. Can you name me 3 good Strickland wins? Yeah, I can. Adesanya, Nasruddin Imavov, Jack Hermanson. TJ Dillashaw's claim to fame is that he beat Barao and Cody Garbrandt. Cody Garbrandt's not very good. He lost to Corey Sandhagen. That was a robbery. It just was. It was a robbery. I think TJ might be one of the most overrated fighters of all time. I'm sorry. I think he might be. There it is. Makhachev at number 1. This is it. That's it. This is my top 15. Top 15 right here, guys. That is the GOAT list. That's the updated GOAT list. Let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time.